Sis, I don't know who told you that you had to hold on to people just because you've known them a long time, but I came to interrupt that lie today. You've been carrying dead weight in the name of loyalty. You've been shrinking your light so someone else won't feel insecure. You've been showing up for people who don't even check if you're breathing emotionally. But God is calling you into a season where healing will require release. Elevation will demand separation. It's time to let go so you can grow. I know it hurts. Letting go always does. You poured your love into places that were never meant to hold it. You showed up for people who couldn't even pray for you. And now you're sitting there wondering, was it me? Baby, no, it wasn't you. It was the assignment expiring, the chapter closing. God is cutting off what can't go with you into your next. And no, it's not rejection, it's protection. Because your purpose is too precious to be delayed by dysfunction. So today I need you to make a decision. Not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but from a place of deep reverence for your calling. Choose you. Choose healing. Choose peace. Because when you stop chasing what broke you, you give God permission to build you. And when you finally focus on yourself, you'll discover the version of you that's been buried under everyone else's expectations. Let them go, Queen. It's time to rise. You can't heal in the same environment that broke you. That may sound harsh at first, but it's one of the most necessary truths we need to hear in order to grow. Healing requires space. It requires peace. It requires a shift, not just on the inside, but sometimes on the outside too. And far too often we try to heal in the same place that shattered us, hoping that somehow the pieces will put themselves back together. But the truth is, God cannot fully restore you in a place where you're still being torn apart. Some of us are staying in relationships, friendships, or even environments simply because we've gotten used to the pain. We've made a home out of dysfunction. You've called it normal, but God calls it toxic. You keep telling yourself that if you just pray harder, love more, or stay patient, they'll change. The situation will shift, the environment will soften. But let me tell you something. You were not called to be a prisoner to your past. You were called to be free. And freedom often starts with the decision to walk away from what is bleeding you dry. It's not that you're weak. It's not that you didn't try. It's that you're finally seeing the truth, and the truth is healing is impossible when you're still being wounded in the same place over and over again. You can't patch up a wound while someone's still stabbing you. You can't learn to breathe if you're constantly underwater, and some of you are trying to find peace in rooms filled with chaos, trying to build self-worth in atmospheres that constantly tear you down, trying to find God's voice in the middle of noise that never lets up, and baby, it's not working because it was never meant to. God will sometimes call you to separate you, not to isolate you, but to protect you. You don't have to prove your loyalty by staying in environments that are killing your spirit. Sometimes walking away is the most spiritual thing you can do. Sometimes detachment is the beginning of deliverance. You've been trying to heal a wound while still sleeping in the bed where you were betrayed, sitting at the same table where you were dismissed, laughing with people who secretly celebrate your pain. How can you ever truly heal when your heart is still under attack? The enemy loves to use comfort as a trap. He'll make you think that because it's familiar, it must be right. That because it's been a part of your life for years, it should stay. But time does not equal alignment. Proximity doesn't mean purpose. Just because someone's been in your life for a long time doesn't mean they were meant to stay. And just because you're used to an environment doesn't mean it's good for you. You're out here breathing smoke and wondering why you can't catch your breath. Wondering why your peace is always temporary. Wondering why your prayers seem to hit a ceiling. It's not that God isn't listening. It's that you're still trying to build on broken ground. Letting go of familiar pain is hard. It's human to want to stay where we know the patterns, even if those patterns hurt us. But staying where you were broken will only deepen the wound. You've got to make the bold decision to choose healing, even if that means walking into the unknown, even if it means saying goodbye without closure, even if it means starting over from scratch. Healing requires a new atmosphere, a new mindset, and often a new circle. You cannot evolve in an environment that constantly reminds you of who you used to be. And I get it. Some of you are tied by history, tied by years of investment, of laughter, of struggle, of memories. But history cannot hold your healing hostage. God is more concerned with your destiny than your history. He's trying to take you somewhere new, but you keep anchoring yourself to places He's already left. You keep asking for a new season while clinging to old soil. And what's wild is deep down, you already know you've been feeling it. The misalignment, the restlessness, the ache in your spirit every time you walk into that space or answer that phone. That's not just emotion. That's discernment. That's your spirit trying to protect your future. You keep telling yourself you're strong enough to endure it, that maybe this is your cross to bear, but God didn't ask you to be a martyr for someone else's dysfunction. He's not glorified in your suffering. He is glorified in your surrender, in your willingness to walk away from what's killing you so you can walk into what He's called you to. And yes, it might be lonely at first. You might cry, you might second guess, you might feel the weight of emptiness. But don't confuse loneliness with being lost. Sometimes the most powerful breakthroughs begin in the quiet. There are some doors you're praying for God to open, but He can't. Not while you're still standing in the house that hurt you. You've got to move. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. You've got to reclaim your peace like your life depends on it, because it does. Stop convincing yourself that you can bloom where you're being buried. Stop pretending that healing is happening when your soul is still hemorrhaging. You deserve to heal in a space that holds you, sees you, nourishes you. Some of you are waiting for permission to leave, waiting for a sign, waiting for the pain to get bad enough before you finally walk away. But what if I told you that you don't have to wait until it gets worse? What if I told you that today is already enough? That your sanity is reason enough, that your purpose is proof enough, that you don't have to keep revisiting places where you were never valued. You don't have to stay accessible to people who drained you. You don't have to keep making excuses for environments that broke your heart and called it love. God is not calling you to survive anymore. He's calling you to thrive, to step into wholeness, to build a life that reflects His glory, not your trauma. But you can't build anything meaningful if the foundation is still cracked. You can't grow when your roots are still tangled in old pain. And you can't hear God clearly when you're surrounded by noise that drowns out His whisper. Sometimes the most spiritual act of faith isn't staying, it's walking away. It's leaving the familiar behind in order to finally become who you were created to be. Healing will stretch you, it will challenge you, it will ask you to confront everything you've been avoiding, but the reward is greater than the risk. You will begin to see yourself differently, you will breathe differently, you will pray differently, you will be different. Because once you remove yourself from what broke you, God can finally begin to rebuild you, not in the image of who you were, but in the image of who He always knew you could become. Loyalty shouldn't cost you your peace. That's something many of us learned the hard way. Somewhere along the way, you were taught that being loyal meant staying silent, that being faithful meant enduring mistreatment, that being loving meant carrying the emotional weight of everyone around you, even when you were drowning yourself. But let me tell you something. Loyalty and self-betrayal are not the same thing. And far too many of us have confused the two. You've called it love, but it's been fear, fear of losing people, fear of looking selfish, fear of being seen as the one who walked away. So you've stayed in spaces that drain you. You've kept relationships alive with CPR when God already called time of death. You've said yes with a heavy heart and served from an empty cup, thinking that if you just give a little more, maybe they'll finally appreciate you. But sis, your peace is not a price tag. And love that costs you your sanity is not love. It's bondage. There's a difference between being loyal and being used, a difference between faithfulness and foolishness. Loyalty isn't meant to be a life sentence. It's meant to be a bridge, not a chain. You're allowed to grow out of environments. You're allowed to outgrow connections. You're allowed to wake up one day and realize that staying loyal to someone else has made you disloyal to yourself. That your needs have been silenced, your dreams paused, your boundaries erased, all in the name of keeping someone else comfortable. And what's worse is how guilt tries to dress itself up like virtue. You've been manipulated into thinking that loyalty means staying no matter what, but can I challenge that? Because sometimes the most loyal thing you can do for both you and them is to walk away. Sometimes honoring your spirit means breaking the cycle. Sometimes the only way to restore your peace is to release the person, the habit, the environment that's been pulling you away from who God is calling you to be. You've convinced yourself that walking away is quitting, that saying no is selfish, but how is it selfish to protect your mental health? How is it selfish to choose stillness over chaos? You're not supposed to be loyal to dysfunction. You're not required to keep people in your life who consistently drain your joy. There's no crown in being the strong one if the strength comes at the expense of your soul. And yes, they may call you disloyal, they may call you heartless, but don't let their label shame you into bondage, because peace is sacred. And any relationship, friendship, or environment that demands your peace as proof of your loyalty is a relationship built on control, not love. There comes a point where your spirit starts to whisper, this isn't it. And you've been ignoring that whisper because you don't want to hurt anyone. But what about you? What about your emotional safety, your purpose, your well-being? You've been so busy making sure everyone else is okay that you've forgotten what it feels like to be okay yourself. You don't need to light yourself on fire to keep others warm. That's not loyalty. That's self-destruction. That's spiritual suicide. Sometimes people love what you give more than they love who you are. They're loyal to your presence, but not your purpose. They support your silence, but not your boundaries. They're comfortable as long as you stay small, stay quiet, stay useful to them. But the moment you set a boundary, the moment you prioritize your peace, suddenly you're changing. And yes, you are changing because peace changes you, but healing changes you. And some people were only loyal to your brokenness. When you start choosing peace, you'll start losing people who benefited from your chaos. They liked you better when you were insecure, when you were apologetic, when you were constantly bending so they didn't have to break. But now God is awakening a version of you that knows her worth. And that version of you isn't afraid to say, I love you, but I love me too. That version of you isn't afraid to draw a line and say, I'm not available for this anymore. And that's not disloyalty, that's maturity. You're not responsible for carrying everything. You're not required to play the strong one forever. You've been so loyal to others that you've abandoned yourself. You've shown up for people who wouldn't cross the street for you. You've answered calls at 2 a.m. for people who wouldn't call back at 2 p.m. And still, you wonder if maybe you're not doing enough. But let me remind you, peace isn't earned through sacrifice. You don't have to prove your value by breaking yourself in half. Some of us were raised to believe that loyalty is proven by how much we can endure. That the more pain you take, the more faithful you are. But that's not kingdom thinking, that's trauma talking. God never asked you to be loyal to cycles that keep you in chains. He never called you to stay in systems that silence your voice and exploit your heart. True loyalty isn't measured by how much you suffer. It's measured by how well you love. And that includes loving yourself enough to leave when peace is no longer present. The world will always tell you to prove your loyalty through endurance, but God measures loyalty through obedience. And obedience sometimes means walking away from what's familiar. It means letting go of the approval you've been addicted to. It means standing firm in your boundaries even when people don't understand. Because peace with God will always outweigh popularity with people. And if your loyalty is constantly being tested by manipulation, then it's not loyalty, it's bondage disguised as commitment. You can be loyal and still walk away. You can honor what was and still release what is. Some of the hardest goodbyes you'll ever say are the ones where nothing bad happened, but everything inside you is saying, this season is done. Don't ignore that voice. Don't silence your intuition. God has been whispering to you through that restlessness, through that unease, through those moments where you come home and exhale like you just survived a battlefield. That's not loyalty. That's survival. And you were not created to live in survival mode. The fruit of real love is peace. And any connection that constantly threatens your mental and emotional health is not rooted in love, it's rooted in need. When people need your presence more than they respect your personhood, that's a red flag. When your value is measured only by what you can give or do, that's not love. It's a transaction. And you are not a transaction. You are not a tool. You are not a utility. You are a daughter of the Most High. And you are worthy of rest, of softness, of peace that doesn't come with strings attached. Loyalty is beautiful when it's mutual, when it flows in both directions, when it doesn't ask you to dim your light or lose your voice, but when loyalty becomes a weapon used against you to keep you silent, to keep you stuck, to keep you small, that's not love. That's manipulation. And it's okay to walk away from that. It's okay to say, this isn't love. This is emotional labor disguised as connection, and I'm no longer subscribing to it. You've been strong for too long, loyal to a fault, faithful to people who wouldn't flinch if your world fell apart. But now it's time to be loyal to your healing, loyal to your boundaries, loyal to the peace that God is trying to plant in your life. You don't have to be everything for everyone. You just have to be true to yourself. And sometimes being true to yourself means leaving the places and people who only loved you when you were quiet, broken, and available on demand. Their absence is making room for God's presence. It might not feel like that at first. When they walked away, when the calls stopped coming, when the connection faded without warning, you questioned everything. You wondered if you were the problem. You replayed every conversation in your mind, dissecting your words, your tone, your timing. You blamed yourself for being too much or not enough. But what if the loss wasn't punishment? What if the silence wasn't rejection? What if their absence was the divine signal that God was about to move in a new way? We often cling to people because they were part of our survival. They were there in a season when we didn't even know how to pray for ourselves. They made us laugh during the storms. They sat beside us when the world felt heavy. And so we hold on not to the person they are now, but to the role they once played. But seasons shift. And sometimes God will intentionally remove people not because they were bad, but because their assignment in your life has come to an end. That's hard to accept. We want things to last. We want the love to stay. But when God is calling you higher, He will begin to clear the room of anything that can't grow with you. You've been grieving people who were never meant to stay forever. They were chapters, not the whole book. Lessons, not your destiny. And while your heart may still ache in their absence, your spirit is starting to feel something unfamiliar. Space, room, breath. At first, it feels like emptiness, but it's not. It's preparation, because when God starts clearing out what no longer aligns, he's making space for something that does, for peace, for clarity, for his presence to fill what once was occupied by noise, confusion, and conditional love. Some people were standing in places that belonged to God. They had your heart, your trust, your vulnerability. You confided in them when you should have been praying. You leaned on them when you should have been pressing into the word. And though they may have meant well, their presence started to cloud God's voice. Their opinions became louder than his whispers. Their approval became more important than his direction. And so in his mercy, not his anger, God allowed the distance. Not to hurt you, but to bring you back to him. There's something sacred about being alone with God. No distractions, no filters, no applause, just you and the rawness of who you are. It's in that space that he begins to rebuild what was broken. It's in the quiet that he begins to reveal who you truly are, who you've always been beneath the layers of people-pleasing and performance. And you would have never found that version of you if you were still wrapped up in their presence. Sometimes it takes the absence of man to experience the presence of God. You've been asking for clarity, for purpose, for peace. But what if all of that is waiting for you in the space their absence created? God doesn't waste exits. He doesn't allow detachment unless it's connected to your development. There's a version of you he's calling forth that requires less clutter, fewer opinions, and deeper solitude. He's stripping away what's superficial so he can strengthen what's sacred. And yes, it might feel like loss, but what you're really experiencing is alignment. We mourn connections because we see them through the lens of history. But we've been through so much, you say. They were there for me, and that may be true. But just because someone was present in your past doesn't mean they have permission to follow you into your future. God sees what you cannot. He hears the conversations when you're not in the room. He discerns the hearts you can read. And sometimes he has to protect you in ways that feel like pain. He will allow hearts to drift and doors to close. Not to punish you, but to preserve you. There's a version of peace you've never experienced yet because you've never had this much space for God to work. You've always had someone in your ear, someone in your face, someone in your heart. But now in this stillness, he's meeting you in a new way. His voice is becoming clearer. His comfort is becoming tangible. And you're realizing that maybe you were never as alone as you thought. You were just finally quiet enough to feel him. Their absence has become an invitation for intimacy. It's not a void. It's an open door. And in that space, God is showing you what real love feels like. Not love that manipulates or gaslights, not love that demands your silence in order to survive, but love that heals, that restores, that holds you without judgment. And he had to move them so you could receive him, so you could finally stop reaching for people who were never meant to be your savior. You were holding on to them out of fear of loneliness, fear of starting over, fear of being misunderstood. But what you're discovering is that God is enough. His presence fills every aching part of your heart. And not only does he heal, but he reveals. He's beginning to show you who you are without the noise, without the attachments, without the weight of constantly proving your worth to people who never valued you. Their absence was necessary for your identity to rise. What felt like abandonment was actually alignment. What felt like heartbreak was holy reordering. What felt like silence was sacred stillness. And while it doesn't always come with explanations, it always comes with evidence. You'll begin to notice how your mind feels lighter, how your spirit feels steadier, how your discernment is sharper. That's not coincidence. That's God filling the space. That's God reclaiming the territory in your life that had been occupied by distractions. We often pray for God to make us whole, to lead us, to pour into us. But when he starts removing what we clung to as crutches, we panic. We assume something is wrong. But what if the removal is the answer to your prayer? What if wholeness requires some people to exit? What if clarity demands a clearing? We want elevation, but we resist the pruning. Yet the vine only bears fruit after the branches that no longer serve it are cut away. You didn't lose anything. God still wanted to use. What walked away didn't have the capacity to go with you. And the more you surrender to that truth, the more you realize you're not waiting for a comeback story with them. You're stepping into a glory story with Him. God is rebuilding your support system, redefining your sense of belonging, teaching you that His presence is more reliable than anyone's promises, and that in Him you are never lacking. This space, this stillness, this solitude, it's not punishment, it's preparation. He's making room. He's reordering your life to reflect His presence at the center. And while it might feel uncomfortable, even painful, there's transformation happening slowly, quietly, powerfully. When you focus on you, God reveals the real you. Not the version of you that's been edited for approval, not the version that learned how to smile through pain, not the version that shrinks in rooms where she should shine. When you finally stop chasing validation, stop performing for love, stop running after people who never saw your worth, God begins to uncover the you that's been hidden under survival. The version of you that doesn't just exist but lives. The version that doesn't just endure but thrives. The version that doesn't ask for permission to be whole. You've spent so long being everything to everyone that you've forgotten who you were before the world told you who to be. You've worn masks, you've played roles, you've silenced your needs, your dreams, your truth, just to keep the peace, just to keep the love. But peace that requires pretending is not peace, and love that requires performance is not love. God is calling you out of the shadows, not because you failed there, but because you don't belong there. You've outgrown the lies, you've outgrown the guilt, you've outgrown the story that says you have to stay small to be loved. When you turn your attention inward and give God your undivided yes, He starts removing the layers that life wrapped around you, the insecurity, the doubt, the fear, the shame. They begin to peel away, and underneath all of that is the real you, the woman He handcrafted before time began, the one who carries divine purpose in her belly, the one who isn't afraid to speak with authority, love with purity, and walk with clarity. That version of you isn't new. She's been there all along. You were just too distracted to see her. Focusing on yourself isn't selfish. It's spiritual, it's sacred. Because when you get still enough to listen to what's happening inside, you begin to hear the echoes of God's voice. You begin to recognize the places that still need healing, the patterns that need to be broken, the wounds that need to be acknowledged. And you stop blaming other people for what only God can fix in you. You stop looking outward for what can only be cultivated inward. You stop needing noise to feel worthy, and you start loving the silence because you know that's where He meets you. There's a version of you that God has been waiting for you to meet, but He couldn't introduce her while you were chasing people who didn't value you. He couldn't show her to you while you were still obsessed with being chosen by the world. He had to let some things fall apart. He had to let the distractions fall away. He had to make you uncomfortable in the places you once found comfort because He knew you wouldn't leave unless it hurt. And now, here you are, empty hands, tired heart, quiet room. But in that place, you're ready to become. You're not broken, you're buried. You've been buried under responsibilities, under generational patterns, under words that were spoken over you that never belonged to you. But when you focus on you, God begins to resurrect the part of you that was silenced. The little girl who was told to be quiet. The teenager who thought her worth was tied to her body. The woman who thought love was earned through sacrifice. All of those pieces start rising, not to haunt you, but to heal you. Not to remind you of who you were, but to confirm who you really are. You've been looking for purpose and performance, trying to earn your place by doing more, giving more, being more. But God doesn't reveal identity through hustle. He reveals it through intimacy, and intimacy requires attention. Intimacy requires you to slow down, to sit with yourself, to sit with your pain, to ask questions you've been avoiding. Why do I keep attracting the same people? Why do I feel guilty for resting? Why do I tolerate disrespect? Those questions don't weaken you, they wake you. And when you allow yourself to wake up, you start to walk differently. The real you isn't desperate. She isn't begging to be seen. She isn't available to anything that dishonors her peace. The real you is rooted. She knows who she is and who she belongs to. She knows that God's approval is enough, that his voice is the only confirmation she needs, but you can't access her until you stop living for everyone else, until you turn off the noise and tune into the spirit, until you stop scrolling through other people's lives and start building your own from the inside out. God will always call you back to yourself before he calls you into your next. Because your next can't be built on broken identity. Your purpose can't be birthed from pretense. He's not interested in using the mask you wear. He's after the soul behind it. The raw, real, unfiltered version of you that isn't worried about perfection, but is desperate for alignment. And once you begin to focus on who you really are, not who trauma made you, not who culture told you to be, not who they needed you to become to feel comfortable, you start moving in a different realm of power. You stop shrinking in rooms where you belong. You stop apologizing for your anointing. You stop explaining your calling to people who were never assigned to understand it. Because the more time you spend with yourself, the more time you spend with God. And when you sit with God, he shows you who you are. Not the counterfeit version, not the watered down version, the called version. The healed version, the chosen, appointed, and deeply loved version. And suddenly, you don't need to be picked because you know you were sent. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean shutting people out. It means letting God in. It means inviting him into your identity, into your habits, into your thoughts. It means letting him tear down everything you built outside of his will. Every relationship you formed out of loneliness, every goal you chased out of comparison, every decision you made from fear, he won't just heal you. And when that happens, your taste will change. What used to excite you will bore you. What used to break you won't even touch you. Because the real you walks in discernment, not desperation. The woman you're becoming doesn't beg, she doesn't chase. She doesn't trade her peace for temporary company. She sits in rooms by herself and still feels whole. She walks away from what doesn't align without needing closure. She honors her emotions without letting them control her. She builds boundaries without guilt. She forgives without reopening access. She rests without shame. She prays with authority. And none of that is by accident. It's the fruit of focus. The result of giving God your undivided attention and trusting him to shape what he started. This is the season where God is calling you back to your center, back to your identity, back to the core of who you are. He's removing distractions, shifting relationships, exposing wounds, not to harm you, but to heal you, not to isolate you, but to strengthen you. And as you keep your eyes on him and your heart open to yourself, you'll begin to see the evidence of his presence in your posture, in your confidence, in your decisions. The more you focus on you, the more you realize that you were never lost, you were just buried. And now it's time to rise.